So Professor Savyasaachi is professor at the Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia. He has worked in the fields of political ecology, indigenous people, development, social movements, and conservation architecture. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Savyasaachi, for taking time out for us. He is also a guide for us at In Dialogue Foundation, and we get immense support and guidance from him. Thank you so much, sir. And you may start the session now, and you have up to 2 hours to take the session. It depends on you when you want to start taking questions and answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Malia. It's a pleasure to think afresh on old questions and think of new questions when I come to this forum. I must tell you a bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from and you know exactly what do I want to communicate. Then I have worked for many years for my PhD and after amongst forest dwellers in central India. That is Bastar, then part of it was in Orissa, parts of Bihar. And then I came to Delhi, started to teach. Then I've been working with architects. And my whole perspective, greetings Akanksha, my perspective actually comes from that part of the world. So I position myself in the forest to see how the world outside the forest looks. And this has happened because of many years of fieldwork in which I almost unlearned everything that I had been taught in universities and at home. And I unlearned in a critical way, which is to say I didn't forget what I learned, but I began to see what I was taught in a completely different perspective. So this is the background that I will come with, and I would say that you're free to ask me questions and interrupt me wherever you feel need for more discussion, because I am going to try and tell you what is the world in which we live and why is dialogue such an important thing that we need. I've also had a look at the themes that you have always have been lectured on by various other speakers. And there's a wide range of it. And there is a huge number of information you must have got. But as the last speaker, I have tried to tune into some of the possible nuances of these other themes, which I thought might help you to focus. So I've titled my talk, Namaste Pal, Self and Other in Dialogue. Now, the word in dialogue means two things. One, that what is the self and what is the other when there is a dialogue. And the second, that self and the other are actually in dialogue. So the dialogue is actually between the self and the other. And self and the other are also equal participants in dialogue when there are two different parties. So I just repeat that two parties are talking about dialogue. So in these parties, there is one contestant and the other, there are two contestants, and each looks at the other as the other. But at the same time, in on both sides, every person who is entering a dialogue is negotiating the self and the other within himself and within the group. So that's the lay of my talk. I repeat, when two parties dialogue, one party is the other for the other party, right? But at the same time, each participant in the conversation on both sides has a self and an other within himself. So the dialogue happens at two different fronts. One on the table, across the table, and one within yourself, self and the other. And the dialectics of this is something that I want to sort of lay out before you. Okay, so the first important thing that we need to understand is that in modern world, dialogue is an absolute non-entity. Not only do we see this in the public domain, but in interviews when people are asked this question, if you were to become the provost of the hostel, of girls' hostel, or if you were the proctor of a university, or if you were in charge of the security of an institution, if there was a problem, if there was a protest, if there was some dissonance, how would you handle the problem? And if in your sane mind you would say that I would ask them what the problem is and then engage them to understand the problem, the prompt answer is this is not the way to do things. Several of my friends have lost the job, have lost in their job interviews because they gave this answer that they would want to dialogue. And they said, sorry, if this is your attitude towards resolving conflicts, then we don't want you. I have not only observed this in institutions, I have also observed this amongst NGOs, where the catchphrase is too much of dialogue is impractical because there can never be a conclusion to any discussion that you have. And we have to take decisions to do things, so there is a limit to which dialogues can be permitted. The third view is that I have observed is that actually there is no need for a dialogue because nobody changes. People are fixed in their views, and any attempt to persuade is patronage, as if you think you know better than the other, and it's not possible to have a dialogue at all. And the last argument I've heard is that yes, dialogue can be considered, but dialogue does not work in all the cases. There are certain hardcore criminals that are not worthy of a dialogue. There are certain crimes that don't need to be discussed at all. And that should be very clear. And that's the discussion that we see when we hear about death sentences. In those cases, there is a very, very clear opinion which says no discussion, only decision. So we want to say that the hypothesis or the thought for consideration is that in an atmosphere where there is little understanding of what a dialogue is, or let's say where people have seen over the experience, it's not that people don't want dialogue, but they've seen through their experience that whenever they entered a dialogue, they have always lost, either economically because it's a waste of time, or two, they've ended up bitterly because nobody agrees. And they have found that when you are firm on your view, when you give them a decision, people are more comfortable with following the decision than if you were to give them a choice of argumentation, free expression of thought and dialogue. Right? So that is the dispensation. So the question before us here is that we need to therefore understand what is a dialogue really and what are the fundamental elements of a dialogue because of which we want to firmly believe that dialogue is very necessary. And so historically speaking, the conditions in which we live today are that there is an increasing rate of violence in this society. There is conflict, there is terrorism, which have overwhelmingly filled the lives of people with heightened sense of insecurity, misery, grief, sadness, discomfort, and the likes. Yet, life goes on. And life has to go on. So anybody who's suffering like this has ultimately to tell himself or herself that life goes on. Life goes on with this burden on their head. Burden of bearing the suffering, bearing the misery. And different people are affected differently by the miseries and sufferings, depending on their position in social structure of class, status, and power. They have different resources also to deal with their miseries and sufferings. But that anybody is free of misery and suffering and discomfort, I don't find anybody who is free of it. Even those who profess to be having a very nice and comfortable life, they can only say that because they have enough resources to mitigate the kind of problems and the kind of suffering that they have to deal with. And a simple bottom line of this is that everybody is dealing with a whole complexity of issues, created personally, created socially, created politically, created economically. And this complexity is so complex that you are bound to get affected by it. The wear and tear of life is bound to happen. There is a problem here because there are efforts being made in society to heal people. But what we notice is that before wounds can heal, things happen in society that give fire to these wounds, give them more fodder. Events happen which do not allow the wounds to heal. And the amount of facilities that we have to heal the wounds works at a different rate of time than the rate at which wounds are inflicted on us. So there is a discrepancy between the rate of healing and the rate of infliction of wounds. And so let's take an example that I am coping with the fact that I have not done well in my exams. And the prospects of not getting a job, the prospects of not continuing my education is high. Now, while I'm trying to cope with this, I find that my father gets unemployed. My father is sacked. To complicate this, I realized that my younger brother, who has been staying at home because of COVID, he gets into a mental trauma. And there is a whole runaway process of things that happen to people, and they're caught in the midst of this tornado. And it happens to everyone. To a lesser or more degree, it happens to everyone. So in these situations, when you suffer, you go for advice, and the most that people do is to persuade you for a dialogue. You have to be available for a dialogue to happen. And this is not very easy. Very few people will agree to have a dialogue in the first place. So a large amount of effort goes in everyday life to make people see the necessity of a dialogue. And then when they do come to the table to discuss, then a different dynamics opens up. Now, what we have to understand is in this scenario where we need to create safe spaces for a dialogue. Dialogue cannot happen in unsafe spaces. We are confronted with a very big problem. And the problem is that we don't understand what is it that is not being negotiated in the process of negotiation. Right? So the situation on the ground is something like this, that differences begin to degenerate into conflict. Conflict immediately leads itself to violence, and violence then degenerates into terrorism and war very fast. The rate at which any difference can lead to conflict to violence, and violence to war is very, very, very fast. It's absolutely rapid. It's like saying two people are having a pan at a pan shop, and there is a dispute over who gets the pan first and who gets it second. And it turns out there's a scuffle over it. And in the scuffle, they find out that one is a Hindu and the other is a Dalit. And that's it. So they gather their own people, you gather your own people. And the issue is basically very, very inconsequential. And it gets escalated into fight between two communities, and then it escalates in national politics, and then all the rest of it follows there. So this is something that we witness all the time, and we don't know what to do about it. At the same time, so what is the problem here? The problem, as I see it, is why does this escalation happen? This escalation happens because there is an absence of social and cultural buffers, which would allow conflicts to be localized, conflicts to be regulated, and conflicts to be resolved at the site of the problem itself. Okay? So we have what we see is, because of the nature of society that in which we live, then the loss of buffers, which means to say that between one situation and the other, there are no social spaces, there is no time available for you to absorb the shock of being different, of getting into conflict. So the absence of buffers is absolutely necessary. For instance, I have a little quarrel with my friend in the university. The buffer in this case is my family, where I go back to the family and I expect my family to allow me the time and space to process it. But I go to the family and the family is in conflict also. Then my next buffer is my peers. When I go to my peers, there is politics there also. And suddenly when I'm in a problematic situation, the character of friends change. Now, the absence of these buffers is a very, very serious issue, because of which things become from local to international. It's the way the capital works, right? So we have no barriers for the movement of money. The law has been made in such a way that all restrictions have been released so that money can travel fast from a village to New York in just one click. That has also happened in social life. So, especially with reference to differences. Now, at the same time, what is happening is, when there is a difference, there is a conflict, we also see that individuals and groups take to protest. They take to protest, they take to resistance and to dissent against the felt injustices that they go through because of the difference, conflict, and violence that they face through. Right? Now, and there are a wide variety of platforms this happens. It is not only in the 1960s, we could say that the sites for protest and dissent and resistance were only in the public domain. When you're sitting and resisting against the political party or the government or the state, now these are everywhere. It's in the family, it's between two friends, right? It's within institutions, it's within peer groups, it's in the court, it's on the streets, it's on the media. Every surface, every platform where human beings interact is also a potential site for protest, dissent, and resistance. Two friends having a fight, they get into a conflict, there's protest there. There's no negotiation, there's protest there. And what I find, and this is my proposition for you to think about, is that each time we get into a protest like this, or we resist like this, the buffers get even further eroded. These discussions are not designed to create buffers. These dialogues are completely oblivious of the fact that we are undermining the buffers that we need to absorb and understand and resolve these problems. We also see that the possibility of a dialogue after protest, dissent, and resistance is only when both parties agree to sit across the table with or without a mediator. Right? And we often know from personal experience at home and in the public domain that the point where you reach before you can sit across the table is very long. Sometimes it goes over generations. Right? Brothers don't talk for years together. Father and son don't see each other for years together. And in the cases that I have seen, this negotiation happens by some quirk of luck, that they suddenly realize that it's valuable to sit across the table. And most often it is either because of property interest. You'll have to excuse me because I'm in a very bad cold. Take time off to sneeze sometimes, so don't mind that, please. I've had a very bad cold for the last 2 days. Okay. Now, I'm not going into what happens in these mediations. I'm just saying that before we can get into a dialogue, it takes a long time to do that. I want to now discuss with you what is the difference between protest and resistance on the one hand, dissent on the other hand. Right? Very simply put, the protest and resistance are basically modes of expressing resentment for not being given, for being denied justice. These are modes of self-expression, really. Right? Injustice in these modes is predominantly the perception of the person who is being suffering. The truth of such perceptions is subject to verification, and verification happens on 3 different platforms as far as we know in contemporary society. First platform is legal, as you go to the court. Second platform is customary, when you go to your community and customary rules abide and apply there. And third is charismatic, when you go to your guru and the guru says, conflict resolved, no more argumentation, and it gets resolved. Right? Now, I want to draw your attention to the fact that in all this, we must not forget that there is a self and a construction of the other which is being contested. Right? Now, as I said in the beginning, these operate at multiple levels. So we'll get into those levels very soon, but just remember that there is a very important nuance of the self and the other that's happening. So injustice may be described as a process of othering, and justice may be described as a process of mitigating against othering. And I'm using the word othering in a more inclusive sense than just the fact that somebody's got punished. So otherings happen at home, othering happen between friends, othering happens to you by yourself. That is to say, you have a sense of who you are, which is quite different from what you think you are. Right? So there is a othering that has happened which you've internalized, and you're constantly struggling with the construction of yourself and what you actually feel you are, or what you feel you are and what others think you are. So this is a constant dialogue that is happening within you. And this dialogue is very important to understand what happens in protest and what happens in dissent. So protest is a mode of demanding what you think is an expected right? Of seeking accountability for a word given, of a point where you argue that the social boundaries have been violated. Right? So protest is about violation of social boundaries. It's about holding somebody accountable for the word that they've given, the promises that they've made, and violation of agreed upon social boundaries. So I come into your room without telling you, so you protest. there was an agreement that you will not violate my privacy. Right? You told me that you will get me 200 rupees for the fees that I have to give for my boxing class. You didn't bring it, so I protest because it's going to harm me. I made a promise. Right? So that is the nature of protest, and this happens at national levels also. So the government promised you something and it didn't abide by the promise, so you protest. Resistance is not allowing the continuation of the denial of a right. So you may protest without resisting. Possible? So I register my point in protest, but I will not resist, which means to say, I hope that you will correct yourself so that I don't have to stand in the way for you to continue to do things again and again. So you come into a room once, I protest, and you correct yourself. Right? I give you a word, I don't abide by it, I correct myself the next time. But it happens 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Then what do? You resist. Right? You close the door. Right? You just say, lay off. But when does protest become resistance is also something worthy of study. Sometimes it takes a long time for protest to become resistance, especially in cases of domestic violence. We see that there is continuous protest, but very little resistance because of many things. In the universities, we see there's continuous protest within the classroom, outside the classroom, but very little resistance. Right? So from protest to resistance, the different dynamics, and I'm not going to discuss that today. All that I'm trying to say is that this dialectics of protest and resistance is visible everywhere, in all walks of life. Now, there is a very deep dynamics to this understanding of protest and resistance. And this deep dynamics is we are not able to recognize these dynamics because of the way in which we have been trained to think about protest and resistance. So we think of protest and resistance as a set of issues, a set of questions that need to be demanded. But what is the underlying dynamics of these demands? What is the self and the other negotiating underlying these demands is something that we don't know. We are not aware of, at least. Now, I'm going to show you a chart. Am I able to share the screen now? So I'm going to show you a chart which will draw attention to this underlying dynamics. So here, everybody can see the chart?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, underlying what we call protest and resistance, which is happening across the table, are these set of binaries. So there is all these binaries. This is a list of binaries given to us by an anthropologist who written in a volume which I've given reference below. It's called The Anthropology of Genocide, Chapter 1, where anthropologists actually studied genocide across the world. And he came to the conclusion that genocide is a result of the intractability of these binaries. So when you're sitting across the table, then these are the binaries that operate, either modernity opposed to tradition, or knowledge opposed to ignorance, or us opposed to them, humanity against barbarity. So take any issue that you want to negotiate. Underlying that issue, for example, you want to negotiate about whether you should go to school or not, whether a girl wants to go to school or not, whether a girl should be allowed to go to school or not. Which of these binaries do you think will be operative in that negotiation? Can you point out any one binary which is operated in this situation?
Modernity and tradition.
Modernity and tradition? Yes, how tradition does not allow a girl to go out, right? Modernity demands, so tradition prevails. Truth and superstition? How would you say, how does truth and superstition work for the education of a girl? It is not, women are not trained, women are not made to be educated, right? Constitutionally, they can't. Their whole biology is structured to do only one thing in the world. So anybody who says that the truth of womanhood is different is unnecessarily engaging in superstitious thought, right? Wealthy and poor. Only the wealthy can go to school. The poor can't, right? Adult and childlike. Women's innocence is very childlike, right? And they continue to be innocent, therefore they're not capable of adult behavior. So therefore they need patronage. These binaries can be used in any problem. And at any negotiation table, we see that these binaries are being used all the time. But on the negotiation table, we never realize that actually our thinking process of negotiation, of dialogue, is basically these binaries. Right? Any discussion on this? Anybody wants to disagree with this? Anybody wants to say anything about this? So this is the self and the other. One is the self and the other is the other. Civilization is self, savagery is the other. Us is self, them is other. Center is self, margins is other. Law is self, uncontrolled is the other. So anything that has to be... So both the parties think of the other like this. When a family is denying a young boy his choice of profession, आपने वो देखिए 3 Idiots, उसमें जो लड़का फोटोग्राफर बनना चाहता है, उसके अंदर सारे ये बाइनरीज ऑपरेट करते हैं. See the point? And the way it is projected in the film, we see it is only a negotiation about his right to do what he wants, and his father thinking that he is not fit for that, it won't get him a job, and therefore he should not do it. But at the deeper level, there is a self and the other dialectics happening there all the time. And that gets resolved after such a long time. Right? Now, this is very important because should I keep this here or should I just take it off? Because I'm going to make an argument which is saying something more about these binaries. You will remember these binaries, right? They're not very difficult to sort of keep in your mind. If you want to see it again, let me know, I'll bring it up again. Now, the importance of all this is that these binaries are very important at 3 different levels of society, which are informing dialogues in this particular understanding of dialogue, which is a dialogue is an agreement to sit across the table to negotiate issues in contention. Dialogue is a necessity to iron out differences in a decent human way. Right? And if you understand these binaries, if you will have a closer look at this binary, you will understand also why a lot of people think that these dialogues are useless, because these binaries are very difficult to get rid of. It will take years and generations for these binaries to get rid of. So they think the dialogue is unnecessary. So why is this significant? These dualisms are pervasive, I think, internalized into individual conscience and collective conscience. That is to say, these dualisms are active in everyday life, the life of an institution and in public domain. In other words, when there is no conflict, when we're living our lives nicely and harmoniously, it is not that these binaries are not working. We are living every life only in relationship to these binaries because we have internalized these binaries very, very deeply. We also think of people as savage. We also think of people as ignorant. We also think of people as margins, right? You may not think of some people as margins, but there is a sector in everybody's life where these binaries are operating in their everyday life. We are not free of these binaries at all, right? Now, the issue is that the negotiations on the table are going to be impacted by the society in which you live. So if the society is able to negotiate the binaries nicely, then the negotiable table also will happen a very nice negotiation. The flexibility and the fuzziness of boundaries in everyday life impacts the way these negotiations happen on the table. For instance, if in a community there is an understanding that women should go to school, there is an understanding that elderly needs to be taken care of, there is an understanding that there is a certain customary rigidness that does not allow us to do this, then when there is a negotiation happening of a case at the community level, then all these negotiations in everyday life also make negotiation on the table easy. But if in community life the binaries are fixed and the boundaries are firm, then the table also will have a similar projection and difficulty. So what I want to emphasize is that dialogue, the success of a dialogue is not really dependent on the play of power or the play of force, but it's dependent on how, within the larger society in which we live, these binaries are being worked out. Right? This is a very important point. If we understand the deeper dynamics of dialogues, is that the deeper dynamics of dialogues is determined by binaries, then we should also understand that the success on the negotiable table is largely dependent on how these binaries are actually negotiated in social life. For instance, there is an issue of property right in a tribal society, right? This issue is going to be discussed and debated with the binary that tribals are backward or not. If in your everyday life you believe that the tribals are really backward and they ought to be pulled out of the forest, then this is going to determine your negotiation table. I'll give an example of this. We were discussing PESA 1993. Everybody knows PESA? Panchayati Raj Extension to Tribal Areas 1996 or 1993. That's an act which allows Adivasis to use the customary law for their own cultivation practices. So we were discussing with the Secretary of the State, who had retired, on using this act to allow people to use the customary law of practice. Which, in other words, it meant that you allow them to live by their tradition. And the case that was being discussed was that here are a group of forest dwellers who actually stay in the forest, who don't come out of the forest for more than 6 days in a year because they want some salt. So if you allow them to use their laws or use this act to stay where they are, let us do that. This secretary told me, देखो बात तो ये है ना कि वो पिछड़े तो हैं ना वो. तो उनको, how can we deprive them of the modern facilities of the beautiful modern world that we have created? The decision was taken on this particular understanding. The law was not interpreted in word and in spirit, but this binary that was operating in the head of the negotiators swayed the decision on the selective use of this proposition in the law. You get the point? If they were of the view that this binary is wrong, then the application of the law would have differed dramatically. Right? So it's like saying that in your office, you are sitting with a Dalit and you are a Brahmin. Okay? Now you are negotiating with them the possibility of having a group party and sitting together. What binary will operate there to determine how the group party is going to get organized is whether you believe that this category of the Dalit is meaningless. And therefore, we can allow them to sit together. Yes, I think there's a question. Zishan, yes, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I just wanted to ask, we were discussing the several classes of binaries. So are these classes of binaries exclusive to each other, or they overlap with each other? Like there is an...
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that point.
Okay, sir. Fine.
So these binaries are so in society we see that these binaries are separated from each other. That's why they're called binaries. Right? They're immiscible. So you can't be ignorant and knowledgeable at the same time. You can't be in the center and periphery at the same time. Right? You can't be good and evil at the same time. So if we were to take a theoretical position and say, actually, I can be ignorant and knowledgeable at the same time. I can be in the center and the periphery at the same time. Right? I can be good and evil at the same time. Both these attributes are to be seen as constitutive of a human being. Now, that is not the case. The binaries mean that you have to be either or. You can't be both. And the moment you put this proposition as you can be both, then these binaries dissolve. So in that case, what would happen is that Adivasi is as much backward as the modern man is backward also. So backwardness is nothing to do with his being in the forest. Backwardness has to do with the way you respect human beings. So the criteria for backwardness changes then. Right? Now that is something that can happen. I'm not saying that can't happen. But the possibility of that happening is dependent on how well socialized you are in understanding the meaning or uselessness of these binaries. Right? So in some families, you have seen through these binaries, you don't appreciate these binaries, you don't regard these binaries well. So in these families, the boundaries are flexible. Right? So somebody wants to marry by his own choice, tradition doesn't allow it. So there will be a midway found for it. चलो आप मिल लो, हमको मिलवा देना बाद में. Right? A girl wants to go to study abroad, चले जाओ, पर हमको खबर रखना. Right? So they negotiate between the two in a way that both are equally possible. Right? And they find some mix of softening the boundaries between them. But in most cases, we will see that this doesn't happen. This brings us to the second level of the importance of binaries for dialogue, which is the economy. There is one important feature of the economy that makes these binaries absolutely intractable, which is the speed of the economy. The speed of the economy is such that it leaves little time and space for you to actually sit and think through what is happening. Time in it. Right? For instance, a student wants a discussion and he's traumatized because he can't cope with the course. He's come from a different discipline and he needs some help to transition from engineering to social sciences, and he needs a discussion. But there's no time. So the supervisor will say, take an appointment and I can't give you more than half an hour. So these binaries get even more difficult to cross over. Right? And that is largely because of the way the institutional time works. And how does the institutional time work? You are given far more tasks than you can actually accomplish with competence. That is how institutions work. That is how economy works. Everybody has to do more than what his share of work is. A professor is expected to do 8 hours of administration every day and 2 hours of teaching. Right? Similarly, in an institution, the director is to do the work of everyone else other than his own. Now, this is a different issue why that happens. But if you have to maintain the speed of an economy, tasks must be finished in the given time. Otherwise, there is loss of money. And if 2 people can't do the task, if there is incompetence, then the one who's competent must do all the tasks. You can't wait for everybody to get competent and then you say, okay, now we are ready to get into the department. No. And that's well up. So through interviews, you get people who sound good when they're interviewed, but when they come, they're not perfectly skilled for the task they do. They don't know how to, say, for example, operate Excel sheet, right? And you have to fill in data for 10 years, and the deadline is 2 months because the evaluation team is coming in 2 months to see. And only you are the person who knows Excel. So ultimately, you stop teaching and you start doing Excel. Right? So the nature of the economy is such that it leaves no time. In other words, the nature of the economy exhausts. Right? It's okay to do that much work, but it exhausts your mental and physical capacities. Right? You don't have the time to think through things. You don't have the time to understand the depth of the problem. Right? And in the absence of time, you're compelled to take the most practical and the most pragmatic route that is available to you. And therefore, the nature of dialogue gets determined in that particular manner. Right? The last is politics. The other factor that determines how the dualism works is judgments given by the court of law. If judgments are repressive, then the filtering effect is that all binaries get very fixed. If the judgment is restitutive, then all binaries begin to open up. Do you get this point?
So kindly elaborate more both the points.
अभी ये किस्सा हुआ था ना हिजाब का यूनिवर्सिटी में कर्नाटका में, ठीक है? तो जो जजमेंट आई तो वो तो बहुत रिप्रेसिव थी वो, तो it filtered down, it confirmed those binaries. If the judgment had said, okay, look, there is freedom, you allow them, you don't have to be violent like this, there are other ways of talking about it, the binaries would have diffused immediately. So even if a person is progressively inclined, liberally inclined, the judgment of the court in some senses also precipitates whether you will shift to the flexible side or you will shift to the strict side. Right? And the other thing about court cases is the amount of time that you need to, you see, if certain cases are pending over 2 generations, then it is not very good for the binaries. Right? If your case is continuing for more than 16 years, right, then it is not very good for softening the binaries. It strengthens the binaries in simple, straightforward cases. So the delay in judgment has a direct impact on the softness of binaries as well. Okay? Now, my point is that all these aspects of binaries and the impact on dialogue is telling me one thing, that the dialogue is not concerned with building buffers. The dialogue that we know of today because of which are dialogues which are associated with protest and resistance, those dialogues are concerned not with building buffers. They are not concerned with softening the dualisms. And the reasons I have given you are these that I've discussed with you so far. Now, what is happening is that because of this, we are missing out on undermining the true potential of dialogue. Does that make sense to you? The potential of dialogue is getting undermined totally in these processes. Now, what is the potential of dialogue? I want to draw your attention, I want to ask you a question. Is there a notion of dialogue independent of negotiating any conflict? Do you know of examples of dialogue which have happened not because of conflict, not to resolve conflict, not as a consequence of protest, not as a consequence of dissent? Do you know of such dialogues in history? Yes, no, maybe, maybe not. बहुत है, देखा हमको दिखता नहीं. We are so conditioned to dialogue as a way out of intractable dualisms that we don't even know that there is a way of dialogue which is not concerned with any conflict, any resolution of dissent, any resistance. I want to give you 6 examples of this. Socratic dialogues, Plato, the death of Socrates. There is no issue involved, no conflict, no political issue, nothing. The entire Socratic dialogue is nothing to do with any protest or any resistance. Nachiketa. You know Nachiketa's story? How many don't know Nachiketa's story? Okay, I'll tell you the story. Everybody knows about Socrates, right? Okay, so here is Nachiketa's story. Nachiketa's story is in one of the Upanishads. It's in the Katha Upanishad. So here is a Brahmin who wants to hold a feast to earn merit that he may go to heaven. So he serves food to a whole number of people who come to the town. And his son, who's Nachiketa, he sees that his father is not doing it rightly. He is not giving them the best food there is available. He's doing shortcuts and he's giving them ill-prepared food or stale food. So he goes to his father and says, this is not the right thing, because if you want to earn merit, you must give to people that which is most precious to you. You can't give things which are not precious to you. So his father ignores it, and this young boy, keeps on pestering his father. And in some huff, the father says, okay, I give you as my sacrifice. Now this boy is a serious boy. He says, okay, I'm going. He says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Yamraj. I'm going. He says, ये क्या हो गया भाई तुमको? मैं तो मजाक में कहा था तुमको. तुम तो बहुत सीरियस ले लिया मेरे को भाई. हर बात को इतनी सीरियसली नहीं लेते, हम अक्सर कहते हैं. हर बात को इतनी सीरियसली नहीं लेते भाई, हल्का फुल्का सोचो. मैंने मजाक में कहा था, बैठो खाना पीना खाओ आराम से बैठो. वो कहता ना, मैं तो चला. वो चला, फिर यमराज के दरवाजे पहुंच गया वो. यमराज उन दिनों घूमने गए हुए थे. He was collecting souls from different parts of the world. And this guy had to wait for 3 days at the doorsteps of Yamraj. So when the Yamraj comes, he says, oh, I'm so sorry, a Brahmin boy had to wait at my doorstep for so long. I apologize to you. And I give you 3 boons that you may ask, and I will grant all the 3 of them. So he said, the first boon is, please give peace to my father. Second boon is that let people who are suffering not suffer as much as they do. And the third boon, he says, tell me what happens after life. You are the man who knows what happens after life. So before I come cross your gates, I want to know what happens after life. Yamaraj कहता, बेटा ये सवाल गलत सवाल. ये सवाल तुमको नहीं पूछना है, तुम बच्चे हो भाई. इतनी बड़ी सवाल तुम कैसे पूछ सकते हो वैसे? वो ढीठ की तरह वो अटका रहा. Hut. In Hindi we'll call it hut. Insistence. He just insisted that his question be answered. And the whole Upanishad is about that discussion, the dialogue between Yamraj and the young boy about this question of life and life after death. Now here is a dialogue in which there is no issue at stake. Eklavya. Everybody knows Eklavya's story? The issue about Eklavya is not the giving of his thumb. Power. The issue of Eklavya is that he willingly gives his thumb and continues to practice archery. The important thing about Eklavya dialogue is when he's refused. You see, Eklavya goes to Dronacharya to ask him to teach. He's refused. Eklavya does not protest. He does not resist. What does he do? He begins to learn by paying respects to the guru who refused to teach him. And he learns better than what his own pupil did. Here is another form of dialogue, which has no protest, which has no resistance. The third one is a story of a Buddhist monk. So a disciple of Buddha goes to Lord Buddha and says, you tell me what I have to do. Give me a lesson. I'm giving it to you in very simple words. He says, what your point is, your task is to go and find out and tell me what is the power of suggestion. So in those days, teaching happened like this. So you were given a question and you have to find the answer. And when the answer was got, you come back to the teacher and say, this is what my answer is. You don't have to sit and get lectures from me. So this man goes, he asks different people, and he asks so many people that everybody is sick of him. He says, now you get lost. We've had too many questions from you. We have no answers to your question. So this guy goes quietly and resides in a cave to escape everybody's dirty eyes. And sitting in the cave, he sees the leaf fall. पत्ते से पत्ता तो गिरता ही है पेड़ से, और उसने क्या देखा जब पत्ता जमीन पे गिरता है कि बार-बार गिरता पत्ता जमीन के अंदर उसने एक छाप छोड़ दी.
So you will have to speak in English, not all of the participants understand Hindi.
He saw that leaf is falling on the ground, and that over time he saw that the very light leaf actually leaves an impression on the ground. And he said, wow, such a light thing has left an impression on the ground. And that was the power of suggestion. So he goes back and tells his master. And the last thing I want to tell you is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. All these examples are telling us that dialogue is there to create buffers, to create the zone for negotiation between the self and the other. And in all these instances, the self is something else than the self that we know in protest, and the other is something else than the one we know in protest. Now, I want to give you my last point is, I want to tell you what this means to me. Right? This, I think, is, if you were to look at it in the same semantic domain as resistance and protest, I would say that this is dissent. Dissent has nothing to do with really demand or supplies. Right? Dissent has to do with keeping the word from getting monopolized. I want to emphasize this point again. Keeping the word from getting monopolized. What does this mean? It means that when you are in any of these modes of learning that I've described to you, you will realize that the word is immortal. The word can neither be created nor destroyed. It has a life of its own. And the power of the word derives from this particular fact of its immortality. Across history, we have seen that the whole power struggle is to monopolize the word and its meaning. Right from ancient times, when kings were representatives of divine will on earth, the word was sacred and they had the monopoly of the sacred word. When the word was taken out of the hands, was given to the public, that's the first revolution that happened. Right? The word is accessible to all. You get the point? In conflicts, in protest, who has the last word is the point. Right? What does that mean? It means that who has the power to monopolize the definition of the word. Dissent is not concerned with monopolizing the word. Dissent is concerned with freeing the word from any monopoly. Right? Is that clear? And is that clear to everyone? And we can have more discussion on this, but at the moment, I just make these two propositions. The word cannot be owned because it is immortal. It is not a property. It is not a property because it has not been created and it can't be destroyed. We only have access to these words to express what we want. Other than that, that's the only relationship that we have with the word. Right? When in each of these modes, Socrates, Nachiketa, Eklavya, the Buddhist monk, they're actually disciples of the word. Right? And nobody is monopolizing the word. They are allowing the word to be free and understand what it brings to them. So the dissent is concerned with the power of suggestion, actually. The power of suggestion is more powerful than the power of argumentation and the power of convincing people. The moment you decide to argue, the moment you decide to convince someone, you're already in a position of saying that I know better than you. And the moment the other person gets this impression, वो तो ये कहेगा मेरी मर्जी, मैं नहीं मानता. It's my will, I don't agree, even if you're right. Because it's not a question of right and wrong there, it's a question of power. Right? Even if you're right, he will not agree with you because it's a matter of power. It's not a matter of the word. And why is the word so powerful? I can give you a few examples and I'll end my talk with that. Why is the word so powerful? How do you know that the word is so powerful? Very simple example. I tell you that I'm going to meet you for a cup of coffee tomorrow and I don't turn up. What will you think of me? कोई problem हो गई होगी, नहीं आए. You must have had some difficulty, he didn't come. I don't go for the second time. Oh, maybe there is some issue there. I don't go the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time. What will you say? He does not keep his word. I can be hypocrite. I can be a liar. I can be a fraud. Word has that power. The moment you utter a word, you are bound to abide by it. Flaky, what does that mean, Pragya?
It basically means that somebody who says something and then kind of, the word doesn't sort of have any value.
So the question you have to understand, that's right. What you have to understand is why is the word so compelling? Nobody is going to
because it sort of carries some sort of trust on it.
Why does it carry that trust? What is intrinsic in that word that it makes you so? It makes you see, a word given is a promise, right? What is there in the word that makes it a promise? Where does the trust come from? And the trust, I think, comes from the understanding that the word is immortal. You can't hold it, but it will hold you every time you speak it. Right?
Right, yes.
So the power of the word is not because of the Chief Justice of India standing behind it, or because of the Pharaoh standing behind it, or because some multimillionaire stands behind it. The power of the word is because the word has the quality in itself to hold you accountable. So the big pharaohs are accountable because you can hold the UN General Secretary accountable if he says something and he doesn't do it. And you'll be fair in doing that. That is the power of the word. And dissent and dialogue have that quality. And we have to reassert that quality. We have to know of that quality if we want to negotiate across the table respectfully. In negotiation tables that we see because of protest and resistance, there is no space for honoring the word at all. There is no honor to the word at all. Not because they don't want to, because they have willfully put this discourse on dialogue out of recognition. In universities, you can't teach philosophy. Most universities don't have philosophy these days. And if you want to design a course in philosophy, it's impractical, no use. Philosophers normally suffer. They don't get a livelihood, they don't get respect, people are throwing stones at them. So anybody who respects the word in today's world has no value. And this is reflecting very, very seriously in the way we think of dialogue. So if we want to have dialogue, then in civil society, this can't be done politically, right? This can't be done in economic institutions. This can only be done in civil society. This mode of dialoguing is only possible in civil society. And if this happens in civil society, the whole procedure of dialogues will change right through. So my submission is that in a very fundamental sense, dialogues are essentially there to create buffers, to allow transitions, to allow thresholds, to allow for exchange without any conclusion. I want to discuss without any conclusion, and I want that space in society for that. I want to sit in my room and discuss endlessly. I may get tired, I may say enough for today, but I would like to not be forced to discuss to come to a conclusion. The non-conclusiveness of a conversation is what is the essence of dialogue. Right? And this is so powerful that it has self-correction in it, it has a power of healing in it, because it is non-judgmental. Because of its non-judgmental character, this space can absorb and heal anything that is difficult to heal. This is a safe space to regulate violence in the society. That is why we think philosophy is important. That is why we think mathematics is important. Not because its applicability to measure things correctly, but because of the possibility of engaging in an enterprise without the compulsion of coming to any conclusion. Conclusion does not mean that there is no judgments, there are no inferences, but these inferences are debatable. Every inference, every proposition is never a final proposition. The possibility of opening a proposition all over again as many times as you like is the essence of philosophy. But when philosophy is now treated to come to any conclusion of how things are, it loses its character. So this can't be done in courts, this can't be done in political machineries, this can't be done in economics, this can't be done in protest. This can only be done in civil society. And therefore, we need to understand, we need to be clear on this difference between dialogue as a way of creating buffers and dialogue as a way of winning a point. Thank you very much. Yes, I think there is a question from Ranjan. Yes, Ranjan.
Thank you so much, sir. I really enjoyed, after a long period of time, someone met who appreciated the idea of philosophy. I also did my master's and PhD in philosophy. So I really enjoyed your talk. And it was really heart-touching for me that you somehow appreciated the idea of philosophy and the role of it in society. Sir, my first question, or to say a challenge which I personally face, is that, on the one hand, we have a utopia that how to have a peaceful society, how to have peaceful dialogue, how to have a good result of, when we have discussion and so on. On the other hand, we start with a dystopia that there are challenges in the society, there is a terrorism in the society, we are facing certain kind of challenges. So my first question is that in the history of humanity, what was the era when we had a peaceful coexistence, when we have peaceful, the situation? So this is my first question. And second, I am a personal fan of Emmanuel Levinas when he discusses the idea of self and others and the importance which he have given to the others, and try to give an analogy how to make others as a self. So how do you look at the Emmanuel Levinas position? So these are my two questions. And my third, argument, or to say, when you are talking about the idea of trust and the idea of immortality of the world, sir, I think that there can be a humanistic argument as well. We know the golden principle of morality in all religions and in all humanistic philosophy, that do unto thyself, don't do the thing which you don't like for yourself. So based on this argument, I think trust also builds up in one way or another. If we can put this argument, or to say the idea, into the mind of the people, I think we can move forward. And one challenge which all of a sudden came into my mind, sir, when I personally have philosophical dialogue with senior scholars, if they do not have anything to say, they come up with the idea that who we are to decide what is moral, who we are to decide what is good, who we are to decide what is rational. They come up with something god-like thing or something transcendental. So how may I deal with those people who comes up say that who we are to decide? They basically disorganize the whole debate and discussion, and in fact somehow makes me feel unconfident that we human beings are nothing at all. So these were the things I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, 3 questions, a lot of it. So I won't take more questions now. I'll take it afterwards because these are big questions that he's asked me. I'll try and be brief so that there's time for other people also. You should read an article by John Dewey called The Category of the Social. It is written in 1928. And that's the only article that I find useful in understanding what social is. There is no discussion on what is social. John Dewey argues, learning from John Dewey, my argument is that there is always a dialectics between forces, dystopia and utopia. Okay? We were at one point of time in history, we imagined a utopia and lived by it. Right? And after the Industrial Revolution, the idea of that utopia was demolished. Now, there has been no time in history where there has been such a peaceful society, as you want to call it. Not even in tribal societies is there such unmitigated peace and quiet. There's always a relative presence of peace and quiet, and relative to the existence of dialogue. So the entire history can be written as saying, how over history we have created the social space where this potentiality can be harnessed. And progressively, I can say that that space has been created over 2,000 years, and the entire endeavor of philosophy is to protect that space. In that protection of space is the activism which leads to harmony. So, for example, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama says meditate, right? That act of meditation is not to create a bubble. The act of meditation is to protect that space where the dignity of the word is safeguarded, even if for 10 minutes. You get the point? I don't think there is a way of understanding the perfect society in which we want to live. All that I can say is that there is a way to continue to endeavor on everyday life to protect these spaces where the social can manifest the way in which we consider the value of the word. The moment these spaces shrink, society begins to degenerate. And the history tells us that all authority is anti these spaces. You should read a book called Library Side. The annihilation and destruction of libraries across the world. Nalanda was destroyed because it was that space. every leadership, every dominant power destroys that space. It does not like that autonomy. It only wants autonomy to itself. It only wants it to define the monopoly of the world. So the struggle is difficult because this involves no protest. I just want to sit and discuss under a tree, and the policeman will come and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. When you go to a garden these days, in Lodi Garden, if you want to have a discussion for 6 hours, the police will come and ask you, what are you doing here for 6 hours, bhai? So you will say, no, I'm just having a conversation. No, that's not possible. How can you do that? You can't have conversation for 6 hours. Conversations only happen for a minute or two, at the more an hour. I'll give you even a more drastic example. When I was doing my fieldwork, my task was to learn the language of Adivasis. So after 6 months, they asked me for a progress report, the ICSSR. So I gave them 100 words. They said, what is this report? I said, this is my fieldwork. I have learned 100 words in 6 months. What else do you expect? They cancelled my scholarship. I didn't get a scholarship after 6 months because I was learning a language. So power is always against the power of the world. The political power is, an economic power is always anti the power of the world because it knows the power of the word is so strong that one word can destroy them totally. Your last question. What do you tell people who begin to say, who am I? You say, neither you nor me are deciding what is moral. We're only discussing what are the principles that make us understand what the moral is. We don't have to pronounce a judgment. It's like saying the blind man and the elephant, right? I'm not discussing whether the elephant exists or not. That is not a discussion that I'm having with you. I'm having a discussion how am I to perceive whether the elephant exists or not. That is the discussion in philosophy. What are the categories that I'm using? Whether the categories are valid or not. That is the discussion in philosophy. You take your own call what is moral. And that is the open-endedness of dialogue. You look at Socrates. Does he ever come to any judgment? Whenever there is possibility of a judgment, he asks a twisted question to open it all again. If you study the Socratic dialogue, especially the death of Socrates, you will see that the moment there is a tendency to move towards a conclusion, he opens the question all over again. Right? So people are very scared of a Socratic dialogue. It's the joy of dance that you have in the joy of conversation. The dance does not have to come into any conclusion, does it? Ranjan? You just dance and the dance is over, you just enjoy it. So dialogue is an aesthetic pursuit. Dialogue is not a dialogue to win knowledge. There's an aesthetics to dialogue, which is very important. It's like dialogues are like storytelling in a very different language. I don't want to come to any conclusion listening to 10 stories. I just want to go back with a nice feeling that I have heard 10 stories. That's it. So people who ask you this question, who are you to decide? You said, nobody is there to decide. I'm just hearing your story. You heard my story and let's go and have a cup of tea and enjoy the moment of this conversation. And that's it. It is an aesthetic moment of beauty. And the moment, if you can't appreciate the aesthetic moment of beauty in a dialogue, then you are getting influenced by the dualisms that prevail in your society. Have you ever enjoyed a conversation which just doesn't end? And everybody says, "Hey, time to go to bed, let's go." It's just a conversation. It's just an exchange of ideas. It's not an attempt to prove anything to anyone. So the people who know less and the people who know more are equal. Everybody can participate. Right? And that is the beauty of a dialogue. That it allows participation for everyone. In a circle, if there are 10 people, Some are professors, some are BA students, some are MS students. This gathering is not conceivable in modern times. If you understand dialogue properly, there can be scooterwalas, PhD scholars, physicists, Nobel Prize winners sitting on the same platform and telling stories of their own discipline. That is dialogue, because that's the buffer that we need. That's the safe space. A conversation without coming to a judgment about people. So in this conversation, you can talk about the most heinous things that you have done, and you will not be judged. Therefore, there is self-correction. When you are not judged, the power of self-correction that is given to you as a gift of nature begins to work. You see, we don't allow the power of self-correction that has been given to us by nature. Nature has given us the power to improve ourselves without any prompting. We always think that we need a prompt to improve ourselves. But if you look at nature, nature is always correcting itself. And that can only happen when there is a conversation without being judgmental. और ये कहाँ होता है रंजन मालूम है आजकल? ये वहाँ होता है जहाँ पर लोग बहुत ही डिप्रेस्ड होते हैं. एल्कोहलिक एनोनिमस. ये कॉन्वर्सेशन वहां होती है. ये कॉन्वर्सेशन आम जिंदगी में नहीं होती. एल्कोहलिक एनोनिमस के अंदर आप जो मर्जी बोल लो, कोई जजमेंट नहीं करेगा आपको. आपने जितना गंदा काम किया हो, जितना भद्दा काम किया हो, नो जजमेंट. दिस शुड बी नॉर्मल फॉर सोसाइटी. Now that is a huge task. That struggle is a very, very difficult struggle. I hope I answer your questions adequately.
Yeah, sir. But one challenge I would like to again pose, that there are some fundamentalist, hardcore religious mind who are always ready with the solution. That I have a text, solution is available in this book, and you have to accept it. This is the problem.
Maintain your silence.
This is the problem in most of the dialogue, whether it is political or social.
That is not a dialogue, Ranjan. That is not a dialogue.
Yeah.
If you get caught there, just maintain silence.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Sorry if I'm abrupt. Yes, sir. Okay, you had your hands up. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute.
Yes, I'm sorry. I really appreciate your lecture. It's not the concluding sessions. In fact, you have opened the whole session into a different way of understanding dialogue, saying that a dialogue should not be judgmental and it should not be conclusive. In fact, it's very much true. It creates a kind of safe zone whereby each one finds himself or herself. And my question also was based on the same question of Ranjan. What would be a dialogue between the ideality and reality of our life? Because there is an ideality, and through our reality, we walk towards that ideality. Is it not, in a way, a kind of conclusive that there is something ideal? Therefore, we have to walk towards that.
I would modify your question a bit.
Yeah.
You see, the notion of ideality comes from a position where you want to be judgmental.
Yes.
There is only an idea. And there is only the real life. There is no ideality. Ideality as the ideal place to live in doesn't exist. There is only an ideation.
Okay. Ideation. Okay, thank you.
Right? So we are constantly dialoguing between ideation and existence. There is only an idea. There is no heaven on earth. There is no heaven that exists out there. I want my society to become, for example, if people say, I want to be truthful, they say, this is a very, very impractical ideal. Right? Now, this is a language that comes from people who are into winning a point. I would say truth is not an ideal. Truth is something that you can't live without. It is an existential necessity. Why? Suppose if I say that when we argue about truth, we can't come to a conclusion. You say my truth is this and your truth is this and her truth is this. But if because we can't come to a conclusion, let's abandon it. Can we do that? We can't do it.
Yeah.
Why can't we do it? Because it has a position in our life, because of which everything gets into order. We may disagree with what is true for you and what is true for me. But therefore, if we disagree on that, we can't abandon the idea of truth. We can't, even the worst criminals can't abandon the idea of truth. There is something true and there is something false in everybody's life. So the whole language of being an ideal person and impractical person is a language that is used by people who want to be pragmatic in their life. So when they throw away anybody who wants to be truthful, they say, what they're saying is, I don't want to go that way. I just want to do things that are workable. I'm not concerned about ethics. I'm not concerned about value. I'm just saying, ये काम करता है, कर दो, खत्म हो गई बात, इतना सोचने की क्या बात है इसके अंदर. But they don't realize that in that decision, they have actually lost a lot. So you have to be very careful in the meaning that you give to these words. When I was in the 60s and 70s, people used to say, "Bhai, bahut ideal alka. He's a very ideal chap," which meant very simply that he's an impractical guy.
Yeah.
And after great difficulty, I learned that practicality and ideality is not the categories to work with. The categories to work with is that you have to do something that is true, otherwise you're going to die tomorrow. Bhai. If the medicine is not what it says, you get sick. If the water is not what it is, you get sick. There is an element of truth value in everything that we do. Right?
Yeah.
If the doctor says that you have blood pressure high, and if it's not true, then you're gone. Right? So I'm very careful in not falling into the trap when somebody says, "Oh, you are a very impractical chap." I said, "I'm impractical. That's okay. That's fine. I mean, that's how you think, then that's it." So that's my response to that whole issue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Pragya.
I kind of want to know your opinion about whether dialogue has been failing more in recent times in our generation, and if that has something to do more with us, with us being more of a fast food generation or 2 minute noodle generation, or something where we are getting things very easily or very quickly. Everything's available, and we are, maybe because we want speed more than maybe sometimes even quality. And we see, in terms of consumerism, we see a similar culture around. So is that also getting sort of transferred to dialogue and dialogic process, or has it always been like the preference of dialogue versus decision, a quick decision? Has it always been similar? Has the struggle always been similar?
There are tribal societies that practice this difference very, very rigorously. In Menda Lekha, this is an Adivasi Gond group. They have to solve the problem of deforestation in the village. Right? And they wanted to take charge of their own forests. So they decided to do it on their own, seeing the corruption with the forest department and the rest of it. And they decided that they will have 2 forums. One for decision and one for discussion. Okay? And the first problem they had to solve was to take care of all the alcoholics in the village. Because they knew that alcoholics, just give me a minute. They knew that alcoholics would kill the entire process. They took 2.5 years to persuade all the alcoholics to see the futility of their enterprise. Every day there would be a discussion. Every evening for 2.5 years. non-stop. And once the alcoholics were produced, they took a decision in the panchayat that they will not allow any forest official to come into the village. So this is quite normal in societies that are considered to be backward and primitive. But the problem with modern society is that, thinking is hard work. It's not easy. And people are in a haste because the rate at which you think and the rate at which the economy works do not match each other. So I'm giving you the best case scenario that a family thinks that thinking is very important, philosophy is very important, so you pursue philosophy, but you have to earn a livelihood also. So when the but comes, you say, oh, you have become 35 now. You can't go on thinking all your life. You better go into the economy also now. Right? This is the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, look at the people who think they die in poverty. So forget about it. Just follow the norm, follow the herd, and you'll be fine. So this generation, the problem with this generation is, I think it's not their problem. It's the problem that there is a vested interest in promoting illiteracy. All across history, the power elite does not want people to become literate. Impossible. एक किसी ने कहा कि बेटा सब पढ़ लिख जाएंगे तो काम कौन करेगा? अगर सब पढ़ लिख गए तो काम कौन करेगा? तो उसने एक कहानी सुनाई कि खुदा ने ऐसा कहा था. मैंने कहा किस खुदा ने कहा था भाई ऐसा मेरे को बताओ तुम. कहते नहीं एक है एक कहानी लिखी है कि को पूछने गया जी सबको पढ़ा दो आप सबको बराबर करो make everybody equal. He says everybody is equal and if everybody is literate then who will do the work? Now this is a myth of perpetuating illiteracy. It's not as if people who become literate can't work or they don't want to work. You see, the idea is that when you work, you look at the underlying thought that when you become literate, you don't want to work. Right? This is a very casteist thinking. That mental and manual labor are separate from each other. Right? But if you don't think in that framework, then if you are educated, you will certainly work. You will have more respect for labor. You get the point, Pragya? Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to ask a question? Sorry.
Sir, I have something to say about Pragya question, which is very pertinent and really struck my mind.
Please.
I have been working on the ethics of technology nowadays. So, I read some thinkers like Martin Heidegger and one recent thinker who wrote the book Fourth Revolution. So according to these thinkers such as Martin Heidegger or the writer of the Fourth Revolution, they are saying that we are living in a new world order, and that is a technological world, and it is somehow reshaping our values, our way of looking at the things, our way of looking at the people. So take for instance, Martin Heidegger says that technology is just not a neutral thing. It basically a kind of revealing phenomenon. So somehow we have to accept the new things which are adding into the modern world. So she gave an example of the fast food and so on. I'm adding the idea of technological revolution. Maybe if we do some sort of factual study or cognitive studies and so on, we may find what are the things that we are becoming so much impatient and how our values, our ways of looking at the things are changing. And we are becoming so much impatient and so on. So this is the thing I wanted to say. Maybe we need to look at the technological revolution regarding to our values and morals and
Just to add to that, Pragyan, the issue is that we don't understand that every new technology we use, we lose our agency.
Yeah.
That is not what we learn, right? Every new technology you use, you lose your agency. And the point is, you have to abide by so many technologies because there are so many things that you can't do. So the problem is, how do you deal with this paradox? Some people say, my agency is my technology. Right? And they become totally technological freaks. वो दांत साफ भी electronic brush से करते हैं वो लोग. Right? There are people who use electronic brushes to clean their teeth because technology is only an extension of the agency. But actually, when you look at it very carefully, this is loss of agency because it makes you less literate about your own self. Right? And now that is an awareness that can only come through a different kind of a process of education. Okay, anyone else?
I think we're done. You've answered all queries, or you just gave a very good lecture. Nobody has any questions anymore.
I'm sure they have, but they will need time to sort of
Process.
So there is, I think, Pushpika wants to ask something.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I know I don't have a question as such, though I do have some words, revolving in my mind, but I'm not able to, construct a question as such. So I'm really thinking. But yes, apart from that, I do have a comment for the session. I'm really, after the session, throughout the session and after the session, it is like, my self is, brimming with joy. I'm feeling joy inside, You have answered and sort of clarified a lot of paradoxes, which I personally felt that I was, I am going through every day. And I think a lot of us are able to relate with a lot of, things which you have said. So I'm like really happy and thank you so much for the lecture, sir. It was such a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I feel nice that you feel happy about it. Very nice. Yes, who is this? Zishan again. Yes, Zishan.
Yes, actually, I also would like to thank you that since I'm from philosophy, I was very intrigued that how you incorporated the concepts of philosophy into this, and also it wouldn't have been a complete circle. I mean, there is no best way to complete this journey of the dialogue studies by putting forward that concluding this thing with that the dialogue is inconclusive. So it's a very intriguing factor of the dialogue. So thank you for that. And I am just curious about what you talked about the binary. So I just wanted to know, do you have any more other literature in mind that we can go through in order to understand the concept of binaries?
Look at Levinas, as Ranjan talked to you about, Self and the Other. Look at Time and the Other by Johannes Fabian. And look at Time and the Other, Levinas, and there's one more book, Anthropology of Genocide.
All right, thank you.
There's some questions, okay. Well, you have to, you can write to me a mail or you can give it to Alia and she can forward it to me, whichever way you like.
And in case, yes, sir, in case anybody wants your document on binaries, you can always send it to us and we can forward it in the group.
This book is easily available on LibGen. Download it from LibGen.
Anybody else who has any questions?
Not a question, just wanted to thank sir for all he has, said today. And as Zishan said, we are concluding this particular course with the conclusion, not a conclusion, but yeah, with the statement that dialogue cannot be concluded. And yeah, like I have read psychology, so psychology also got here from philosophy, so I can relate to a lot of things. And I'm really grateful to sir for this. And actually, we were smiling in throughout the session, and we got to know a lot about many things. And yes, we will have some questions in future, and we would like to, bug you with that. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much for your words. Thank you very much.
All the time that we have known Professor Savyasaachi, he's always been available for all of his students all the time. And apart from his on-screen instruction, he's a great help backstage as well. He helps us a lot with everything. So with this 33rd and the last class of In Dialogue Foundation's certificate course in dialogue studies, this was the third certificate course, sir. So we have come to the end of this year's session. Thank you so much for your cooperation, and we hope that everybody equal parts benefited and enjoyed all the sessions. And we sincerely hope that you make all the learnings from this course a part of your life. To all the participants, we will be sharing the reflections form, which you will have to submit by tomorrow, 6 p.m. So because this is the last session, I will remind you that the participants' performance in the course will be assessed based on the set criteria shared earlier. And you will be receiving an email by next week informing you whether you earned the certificate or no. So your results will be out in a week. Good luck to everybody. And within a week, we will have an online graduation ceremony. A lot of our instructors will also be a part of it. And for those of you who are in Delhi, we will have a get-together soon, hopefully. So we will get to meet in person. But the course is in the end of it. Since I am the alumni coordinator, both I and the Secretary General Bezaz Fatmi would love to keep in touch with you and collaborate for any future projects that you have in mind and anything else meaningful that we have in mind. So, and that will be regardless of the result. We thank you for your participation, and thank you, Professor Savyasaachi, for your support and guidance. We're looking forward to working on last year's project that we started, the book.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be done, and hopefully we will do that with the course. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel, and I really enjoyed myself. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.